I'm scared.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I know you're all conversing, and I'm going to go ahead and get started with our great panel here of different companies that will share some perspectives on their own experience, primarily engaging with students is how we're going to talk about this session a little bit more so, and the different industries they represent and how big data is being applied and creating new opportunities within their domain. So I'm going to introduce each of them, and they're going to tell you a little bit about the work they do and how it relates to big data and the centers they oversee. And I'll introduce each of you, I guess, separately as we go on down the line. So if you can just tell us a little bit about what you do after I tell you a brief introduction about each of them. So first on my left is Beth Ladd from Caterpillar Innovation Center. And she has been doing a great job leading a center with a very interdisciplinary team addressing data at the periphery, perhaps, of Caterpillar's business. And one of my favorite things that Beth talks about is how she identifies talent and how she finds students who can work on data projects. And aptitude and attitude are two things that I think of when Beth describes finding great people. Beth, tell us what you do a little bit.
So I have been with Caterpillar for about 3 years now at the lab. I actually now have the privilege of running both of our student labs, one here in Urbana and one in Chicago as well. And a big part of that job is bringing together students from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds to work on our business problems that have a data component and a technology component. So that could be everything from business analysis and process analysis, all the way to statistical analysis and ultimately software development and pretty much everything in between. So oftentimes all the things that people don't think about when they think of a heavy equipment manufacturer.
Thanks. Next we have Todd Hart, and he is overseeing, thank you for whoever's advancing on my behalf. And so he's the Graybar Innovation Lab. He previously had been at State Farm, where we first had the good fortune of working with him at their R&D center, and then recently joined Graybar about 6 months ago or so in leading this new lab. And it's one of the trends I think that we're seeing is another growing application, which is supply chain, that impacts many industries and is ripe for data, and it's ripe for IoT to make a big difference in how we get the right goods to the right places at the right time. Todd, tell us about yourself.
That's right. I was looking at that picture and I was wondering if I could actually have any closer to the camera there. So as Laura said, my name's Todd Hart, and I lead Graybar's innovation efforts here in Champaign at our iLab. So we're relatively new here in Research Park. Our operation has been in existence for about five and a half months. May 1st was our kickoff. And so right now, really we're kind of trying to get our legs underneath us a little bit, trying to figure out, what are the most efficient ways to interface with corporate. I think probably some of you heard Dan Sherman this morning. Dan is kind of my counterpart down in St. Louis, and he also has an innovation and BI function. So that's part of my purview is to, again, understand the best ways to interface with corporate, as well as understand, how the students in the innovation lab can interact with some of our operational areas out in the company. So, for instance, we have a group called Continuous Improvement, and they're kind of focused on, excellence in operations management. We feel like there's probably a strong connection there between the innovation lab and the CI network within the company. So that's another one of my responsibilities. So, yeah, that's it for now.
Thanks, Todd. Next up, we have Owen Doyle from the Ameren Innovation Center. Owen joined us a few years ago in opening this center. I think it's been about a few years. I have to get my dates incorrect, maybe. And he was the first and only full-time employee with a bunch of students trying to figure out how the power industry might change with data integration and with more digital opportunities to help in the field, perhaps, or for all of us that are consumers in this local area. And one of my favorite things that Owen says as an electrical engineering graduate from the University of Illinois is that Ameren has lots of electrical engineers, and that whatever problem they have, it's an electrical engineer that can solve it there for sure. But maybe he's challenging them to bring a little bit broader perspective.
Yeah, like Laura said, I run the Ameren Innovation Center here. And for those of you who don't know, Ameren is the electric utility that serves this area of Illinois and Missouri. We're headquartered in St. Louis. But one of the reasons we got into this was all of a sudden we were in this very conservative industry, and we started deploying smart meters and all this new equipment to help better serve our customers. And along with that came tons and tons of data. So what we've been working through is using multidisciplinary, not just electrical engineers, but multidisciplinary student teams to look at some of the more advanced analytics we can do with all this data that we have. And then another part of my job that we've been getting into recently is the electric utility industry is relatively a non-competitive industry. So we've been getting involved with a lot of other utilities and sharing data, sharing information, sharing best practices for what we can do with all this information.
And next up, we have Brandon Dohman, and he leads the Syngenta Digital Innovation Center. It newly opened this year. He had previously been at the Bud Lab working in the research park, and now he has, I would guess, the most hipster, sassiest, funniest ad postings in the research park, as he's brought a really neat personality to us. If you don't believe me, check out his job posting from yesterday for hiring the very best graphic design in the world. Is that the standard you have? Yeah. Lit Spotify playlist and many other features of snacks that are offered in the job description amongst his personality. So beyond being funny, what do you do, Brandon?
God. I feel now I'm pressured into being funny, and I'm going to nosedive here quickly. But I help run the Syngenta Digital Innovation Lab, which is right across the street. We do have a pretty awesome Spotify playlist, an even better coffee machine. We do as everyone else here is doing with a multidisciplinary team, range from engineers to creative writing and graphic design. Our goal here is to look at new technologies and ways of using some of our existing data and procuring new data to see how we can catapult our company into what's going to be happening in the coming years, but not just next year, but 5, 6, 7 years down the road.
So I'm going to start with asking each of you to give an example of a type of data project that you do at your center. And I think that might help to characterize how you engage students and how they work on thinking about data problems perhaps differently than the organization might have otherwise. And we'll come back to that point, but you could talk about one sort of application area of data that happens at your center that maybe pushes the envelope a bit for your organization. That would be great. Beth, can you start us off? And you won't necessarily be first always.
Thanks. So I'll talk broadly about a family of projects that we've worked on. One of the unique advantages that Caterpillar has had for many years is its dealer network. And so, like many industries, sometimes the thing that is your greatest strength can also be your greatest challenge. And so what that has sort of metamorphosized into in the last couple of years as students have looked at problems or challenges out in the field is that dealers have historically owned the relationships with our customers rather than us owning the relationship as the manufacturer with our customer. So one of the unique things that our students can do that's a little tougher for us to do at the corporate level is go talk with customers. And when I say customer, I really mean the man or woman in the machine, the person that's pushing dirt or digging a hole or doing whatever they're doing with a variety of Caterpillar equipment. And so we've had some really unique opportunities to work on some software development projects, predominantly mobile-based on a variety of different platforms. We've used 3 or 4 different stacks over the last year or so to help operators essentially be able to digitally track and tag the things that they're seeing out in the environments that they're working in. So that could be everything from if I'm a snowplow driver noticing that a sign is down and being able to say exactly where that sign is so that someone in the county can later come and replace that sign, all the way to mining facilities where they might notice areas of the haul road that need to be fixed, and we can tag exactly where that point is so that the next truck doesn't get in trouble there. and a variety of other things, like being able to say, I'm on a construction site and I've dropped a bucket here. I took this work tool off, I put another work tool on. This is where I left that work tool. And in a site that could be hundreds of acres, where you can't see the entirety of the site, and where things move and change, sometimes on an hourly or daily basis, it's incredibly important to be able to have that communication. So we've worked on several projects recently in those areas, thematic areas.
So currently, we have a relatively small, what I would call the data analytics operation at the Innovation Lab, and that's mainly because of the newness, of our operation in Research Park. I see this space certainly as an area for significant growth. So I'll just say that I see it as really a strategic operation and a strategic value-added service that the Innovation Lab can actually extend, to our company. One of the projects that we currently have at the Innovation Lab has to do with our sales force. And Graybar has a fairly significant sales force, I think, 2,000 plus individuals, both inside and outside sales, across several different verticals. We sell into the construction vertical, we sell into utility, as well as government, institutional, those types of things. And we've never really had a prescriptive type of approach as we think about placing new salespeople into the organization. We have 13 districts across the U.S., and they tend to act somewhat independent of each other. And so I think the placement of sales individuals across those different categories has been kind of a gut sort of reaction. And so the current analytics project, it's called Salesforce Growth and Placement. And so really it's looking at both internal metrics, things that you would tend to arrive at, number of customer assignments and zip code, geographic coverage and things like that. But we're also looking at external variables as we think about a predictive and prescriptive model for placing salespeople. So it could be things like, home starts, building permits, looking across MSAs as far as density within that particular metropolitan area, and basically combining those internal and external variables into hopefully like I said, a prescriptive type of approach where it's a little more scientific and it's something that we use holistically across the organization versus maybe kind of disparately, in each district as it is today.
I'll take a little bit different route on this. We've tried just about every type of analytics there is, some success, some failures, but one of the things that I think really showcased the way analytics can get people thinking a little bit differently was we started a project looking at home automation devices. And we all have home automation devices. Everybody's really interested in them from an energy standpoint. And it started out very simply as a home energy monitoring. So then we started looking at it from the customer standpoint. Why do our customers want these things? What benefit do they have? And over time, it actually evolved into a much larger project. We had different multidisciplinary students. Some students started talking about, what does our customer want? And does it matter from an electric utility standpoint how we deliver this power? And eventually we landed on home energy devices could not only help our customers, but it could help us as a utility manage the demand on our system. So ultimately we ended up looking at what would happen if we as an electric utility controlled all of your home automation devices on a neighborhood or city or even larger scale. And so what made the multidisciplinary piece of this really nice was our stats students immediately started looking at this as an optimization problem. Our coders were like, okay, how can I code this in the fewest lines? And then we had some more creative students who were thinking, well, how can we market this to our customers? And a couple key findings out of that is, one, it's very possible for us to do that. And it would actually on a significant scale help us control demand, reduce how much energy we have to generate at specific times, things like that. But another piece that we discovered doing all this research with other utilities was that it had to be a passive experience. And we've alluded to that in a couple of the other talks a lot about, well, we can use analytics to make decisions, but it got down to the point where if we just selected a few slider bars for our customers to select options, and then they could forget about it, and it would just automate their home, versus in areas where they've done home automation discounts, customers go in and you get a really great discount for a few months, and then you start to get lazy as a customer, and then you start forgetting to set your thermostat, then you quit looking and checking at your appliances. So that was a really big insight for us, just like now that we have all this data, we can actually think very much more about our customers as opposed to just sending electricity to you and billing you once a month.
Thanks. It's one of my favorite projects in the park, I'll say, because I think there's a lot of expectation that if we feed customers data, they will use it, versus perhaps we need to use it for them if they opt in and let us, based off of a capability that you develop to automate it for them.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Brandon.
So we're looking at data from a couple of different perspectives. One is how can we use our current data sets that we're currently using to make projections or model data against better. So we have certain data sets that can only be manipulated by a particular expert in the field. How can we take that data set and feed it into some sort of artificial intelligence to allow that data set to be powerful for a larger group of people, rather than having 4 or 5 experts inside the entire company be able to manipulate and express the outcome to everyone? Can we get some sort of insights through automation? The other piece is starting to look at new data that may be valuable to us. We may be using it in smaller pieces of the company and are using our lab here to try and uncover extra data points in those particular areas to see if it's something that we can start to do some sort of projection or modeling off of.
So I love when we're talking to students and they want to know who to work for in the research park. They're not really sure who, and they have maybe ideas of what different industries are all about, but they've maybe never heard of a company before, and they're just looking to apply their skills in the best way possible. Each of you has a charismatic way, I think, that you describe what the opportunity is at your center. Can you tell us a little bit about, when you interact with students, what they believe your company does and how you help excite them about something they wouldn't have expected that they would be able to do, perhaps with data or other sort of computing or IoT-enabled projects? Anybody can hit this first. Brandon, you're really good at it, so go ahead.
So I don't forget the question. I hate being at the end because usually I've already forgot the question by the time it gets to me.
What do people think when you say Syngenta? Do they know you're a seed company, or have they never heard of it?
Just a blank stare, primarily. Most of the kids that we have from engineering or basically any school that isn't ACES, unless they grew up on a farm, have no idea what Syngenta is. And as I look across the room, I see a very similar look on most people's faces as I do the interns, which is okay.
You're a Swiss company that makes chocolate and watches, right?
Yes, exactly that. So it's nice because I get to then sell them on the mission. They if they've done a little bit of research, they know that Syngenta is ag sciences, but they don't know what we do here at the research park. And our motto for our internships is the internship that you have helps feed the world. Our goal is to become a more sustainable company, to be able to grow more food in less space. And so it's something that we can really sell the interns on, and they get super excited about that because this generation is very much about giving back, possibly more so than previous. They really want something that they can connect with that is a part of their life and not just a particular job. So it's fun to be able to market on that point and sell the purpose, but also on all of the other crazy things that she mentioned earlier with the job postings. And I have a blow-up turkey at my office now that's really fun too, sitting outside the front door. So we like to mix it up.
Thanks.
Did I forget half of that question?
And I think perhaps students don't know that agriculture companies are deeply interested in computing and data problems, and so you might have that challenge if you want to speak to that too.
Yeah, and it's part of it. Most of them don't 100% know what we have in the industry, but as we start to explain to them, as Mark was talking about earlier, IoT and data on tractors and tons of other data points, they start to get excited and see how the connection goes from the farm to the food that they eat, whether in the dining hall or they make at home. It's interesting to see that full picture come to light. Again, there's many kids in our lab that have never been on a farm, so we like to go out and expose them to those things to see what the industry is all about and why it's such a big mission of ours to really protect the environment and how we can do that with data. How can we be more efficient in creating seeds and doing research to help speed up the next strain of whatever particular crop you may have that can, withstand droughts and other stuff to still produce large quantities of food.
Beth, everybody thinks you work on construction equipment and you work on data problems, so I know you might have a creative answer for this one.
So the first thing I get to tell the students that I interact with is I'm not an engineer and I don't play one on TV. I actually have a business background, so Caterpillar has many problems that are not just engineering problems and construction problems. So that oftentimes, as Brandon said, the first step is really just helping them understand that a company's purpose is more broad than the industry vertical in which they appear in Dun & Bradstreet. And I think that's an incredibly important understanding for our students. Every one of our companies has finance people, has HR people, has data people, has computing people. So there are a variety of roles, and all of them are in support of our, whatever our broader initiatives and missions are. So for us, I kind of like to pick on sustainability a little bit. That's one of Caterpillar's pillars. And there are a lot of things that we do and that are done in the industries in which Caterpillar competes that can be helped by better business decisions and better use of data in making those decisions. And that could be everything from helping the fuel truck driver who is working on a 40-mile construction site, who spends on his, who on his 12-hour shift drives 120 miles up and down that section of highway all day long. His job is to fuel trucks, feed fuel to every machine that's on that job site. And if there was a better way to do that, if we could look at how many times he drives, where the machines are, what the ambient air temperature is that day, which bulldozers are in use and which ones aren't, and we could help him optimize the choices that he makes as he drives up and down that space, figuring out what needs to be fueled and when and where, he could burn less fuel, he could create less emissions, and we would have a much better sense, right? The job sites would be more efficient, they would be burning or wasting less time, right? There are a lot of things that we can do in terms of efficiencies, in terms of changing the way that our industries do business and thinking about how they do business, whether it's mining or construction or energy and transportation or marine or all the other areas that CAT works in. There are real impacts to be made there by just looking at and or creating new data sets.
So we don't have the brand recognition that Caterpillar has, and I don't think that we're saving many lives. But Graybar has an interesting story, and it was a new brand to me when I came to the organization. And again, as Dan mentioned earlier, we're almost a 150-year-old brand, and so we were born into existence, I think 2 years after the University of Illinois, which is kind of unique. I think there is a certain level of appeal or maybe allure to students, student interns, when they come to work for a company that has the legacy that we have. And how I kind of tee it up is, help me sort of usher Graybar into, the next 150 years. We share a lot about our history, and we've got some really cool, relics and photos, and I think they look at that and think that's really cool. I'd like to be part of this organization, but I'd like to kind of take them into, the future by way of analytics. So my vision for the Innovation Lab is maybe a little bit unique. But effectively, you know, our plan is to have a kind of a market research operation that gets into, as the name implies, you know, certain levels of market research, competitive intelligence, economic intelligence, and then basically move from that operation into kind of a data analytics operation. So if you think about an idea kind of flowing through our innovation lab, it starts kind of in this market research area, it moves into kind of a data analytics sort of vetting process, and then ultimately moves into a POC, a proof of concept, or an MVP. And so, you know, my hope is that they have kind of this collective view of how an idea flows through an organization and how they fit into that particular ecosystem. So, yeah.
Oh, and I'm going to have you address it a little bit differently to move into another area. But one thing that I know you do well with students is that you have students freshmen up through PhDs and cross-discipline at the university. Can you say how that might appeal to students and how you leverage that as an experience to work on perhaps data projects, but in a way that they might not be able to do in the classroom?
Well, first off, who doesn't want to work for an electric utility? I mean, no. When you start trying to sell something like that, the good news for an electric utility is that everyone buys our product. So there's at least a passion for the product, and so that's the first angle you take when you're talking with a student about coming to a facility like this. But the second side of that, which Laura's alluding to, is we're seeing a cultural change in our industry that I've been in our industry for about 15 years, and the first 10 years of that, it was the same conservative, keep the lights on, don't rock the boat, and just with smart meters and things like that, which I mentioned earlier, the cultural change is incredible what's happening. We're moving into the next generation of employees, and we're thinking about how to, our customer interaction is much more important. So when building multidisciplinary teams to focus on exciting projects that are actually, in our opinion, changing the world, that's where you really start to get students interested. And then you add on the fact that they're working with students they may not work with on another side of campus. We have friendships over the course of the summer. People are like, well, I would have never met this person from this other campus outside of an experience like this. And that's really carrying into our corporate office too. One of our students who was an ACES major went to our corporate office. She was just featured in Ameren's corporate journal because we've never had an ag major before, and she's coming in and adding value to our company. And so that's the experience that I'm trying to sell, and that's how I'm trying to get students excited about what we're doing.
Great. So another thing that all of you do is sometimes make your company perhaps a little bit uncomfortable because you push new opportunities that students are doing without much experience with the business. So that can create a couple of things. Something you talked about before is how students come in with no internal bias. How does that impact your business, and how does that make them think about business challenges different than their counterparts who might work in data or BI jobs inside the company that have a different perspective? Anybody that wants to go for that?
I'll go ahead and continue with the cultural aspect of that. We recently did a project not too long ago, and it wasn't heavy analytics, but it was definitely data analytics. We got outage data, and we can all relate to outage data in the room. You know, when the wind increases, we have more outages. When we have ice storms, we have more outages. But there's a lot of other little nuances that can impact that. You know, we service a lot of wooded areas where there's restrictions on how much we can do tree trimming, so we have a lot of tree trimming outages. And we have areas where the soil's always high moisture content, and poles are really hard to keep standing up. So we have little things like that, and our students went through this data and created a lot of visualizations on outages and what caused them. They were even able to identify areas where we had recently done upgrades because outages decreased significantly. And we had a really big aha moment with our executives, which I really think fed into this cultural change. We had an executive who had 30 years of experience in our industry and looked at these charts and was like, no kidding. I know this. I know where these outages come from. I even know these special things that cause outages. I've been working here for 30 years. I know these things. And when we started to explain that, look, we brought in 3 students, they spent 2 weeks working on this data, knowing nothing about our industry, and they came to the same conclusions that you've learned over 30 years of career, that legacy knowledge. And all of a sudden, we won't have those big, oh, we can save $30 million if we look at this thing. You know, we're a conservative industry. But all of a sudden, people started to see value in the knowledge transfer and the fact that we have an aging workforce. And everybody's been panicking, how are we going to pass this knowledge down? Even if this solves a part of that, it was a huge, huge moment for us.
I do not have as cool of a story as that. I wish that I did. But the thing I like most about our interns is they think differently than people who have been in industry or people who have been in a particular job for many years. One of the areas that we're looking at now is how to automate a process of data extraction from PDFs. We have multiple people inside the company that are doing this day to day. Their primary job is to take data from a PDF and put it in a database so that we can access it. The people who do that are...
Sounds like an awesome job.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the people who do that are excited because they have a job. But my interns come in and say, why would anyone want to do that? And I like that perspective. And for those of you who have heard me go off on my many rants on automation and robots, know why I think that, because humans are meant to do more. We're not meant to drive trucks. We're not meant to be taxi drivers. We're not meant to whatever. We can automate all of that stuff. And we will automate all of that stuff in the very near future. And the interns that we have are excited to make the world a better place. One, through the data and stuff that we can grab from that, but to create cooler, more intellectual jobs by helping support what we do through artificial intelligence and other aspects.
I'm going to stick with you for a second because I know something else you've done is you've busted the notion that whatever conclusions you come up with must be told via PowerPoint. As somebody who's a PowerPoint aficionado, I think, or maybe just dreams in PowerPoint, maybe I'm not that great at it, you don't let your students necessarily report their project results that way. So how have you changed how you come up with a way to present the results of a data project or some sort of new technology in a way that's compelling and interests people in the company?
Yeah. At previous roles that I have, I won't mention places, I made a lot of PowerPoints, and I thought they were all fairly wasteful, not only in my time, meant putting them together, but the people on the other end I don't think really wanted to read them. So one of the first projects we had was the data PDF extraction, and to tell that story of what we did, we created a comic strip and a story, and that's how we sent it back to everybody in the organization. This past one, we went with a slightly more in-depth comic strip, but we put a poem with it because I wanted to see how they would play off of each other, and it gets people really excited about what we're doing. Essentially, we are replacing some jobs, but people don't see it that way. They see it as we're giving a better future to a human or a job, giving them more purpose and stuff like that, and that's what we're really after. We also created a little video about what machine learning is and why it's necessary. A lot of people that we were working with said, can't the computer just do this, and can't you just write scripts to extract the data, when our machine learning model was one that needed to be taught. So they go, I already have a system where I take the data from the PDF and I put it in the database. Why do I have to use yours when it's going to take me a little bit longer? Like, if you use ours, you don't need to do this in 6 months from now. So it's a lot of storytelling, and I talked last couple weeks in a data analytics class on campus and said that that's a big portion of what I think data analytics is going to be in the near future, is being able to tell stories around the data that people can understand and can actually relate with.
So sometimes you're having to push students to work on data projects where they don't have a lot of background in doing it. They may have taken some courses related to it, and it may be pushing their comfort zone as well. A little bit we talked about how you move students up in sophistication. Many of them may say they want to work on machine learning problems, but they don't quite know how to do that yet. Before they get to that, they may start with something that's Excel or database or something like that. Can somebody talk about sort of an evolution of sophistication of projects and how you help to make that possible for your students and maybe internal to your organization to elevate your game? Beth, maybe because you've got some history.
All right. So one of the things that I tell the students when I'm recruiting them is that I want them to think from two perspectives when they consider coming to work with us. The first one is you could come and you could work on a project and you could work in a role in which you're comfortable. So if you've programmed in Python before and you want to program in Python, or you want to program at all, great. Perhaps you could take a role on one of our teams where you program. But the other way I want you to think is you're interested in learning to program, or you're interested in learning about the back-end database or whatever it is that you're interested in. And you'd like to join a project where you take on that role and learn it with someone else. And there will always be someone else on the team or in the lab who has done it before or has some experience who can guide you. So I think we've seen a lot of success in allowing students to self-select in a learning mode. Let them be paired up with someone else. Let them learn with a partner or a buddy or from one of the full-timers in the lab who has some experience. And then once they've done that once, very quickly, they will become somebody else's buddy next semester or next project, and they'll teach the person behind them. So it gives them an opportunity to see that, number one, they can learn in a setting that doesn't involve a textbook. They can accomplish something very, very tangible out of that, something that's not only an academic exercise, but additionally is a project-based exercise. And then they have an opportunity to pay it forward the next project or the next time around and be that teacher or mentor to the person who's new to the lab or to the team. And that experience, that cycle, in lots of different ways, is what is incredibly meaningful and important to our students.
So I might mention that we don't necessarily have a maturation process at this point for our data analytics. I could see how that would be beneficial, but one thing that we do is we ask them to, of course, not only do the technical aspects, but how do you take your findings and synthesize them into something that is meaningful? And so many times we'll ask them to pull their work together in a one-page position paper, for instance. And sometimes that's a little challenging for folks who haven't necessarily had to do that in the past. And we all know that time is scarce, particularly if we are working with an executive audience, and so that that particular ask, I guess, of them really is challenging at times, and it really pushes them to think about their work in a slightly different way and how to tee it up in a way that kind of informs decisions and allows for decision making.
I hope I'm not saying something I can't say about Graybar, but recently I was interacting with one of your students, and he had written about the possibility of cryptocurrencies. Mm-hmm. And we had a internationally recognized expert in the field that was coming to visit the research park. And we went to Graybar as an example of a company that was maybe thinking about this. And this grad student was so excited that he was going to be able to talk about supply chain and how this might impact it. So maybe if you could share a little bit of that, of how do you give students a chance to work on something that they wouldn't expect that they would get to work on in your company, and how do you decide what technology? You said market research, but I think it's a little bit more, it's pushing the envelope technologies for the company. Maybe you can't say anything else about that, so I'll leave that.
So part of our innovation lab is very discovery-based, so it's open-ended. There aren't necessarily questions that we're trying to answer, and I think this was probably an example of us thinking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and and how we might leverage that within a supply chain type of environment. So I know the particular intern that you're talking about, and I'm not surprised to hear that he was super excited to meet someone who was an expert in that field. Sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes technology or maybe an emerging trend that comes into the innovation lab. I feel like it's kind of a technology in search of a problem, which I'm not a huge fan of. But I do think that having a group of folks kind of constantly scanning the horizon for emerging trends or even unique ways of leveraging existing technology is smart. And I think it's something that you have to have. But I think the flip side of that is, being part of solving an existing challenge. And again, that could be through data analytics. It could be a combination of data and market intelligence, as well as, again, some proof of concepting. But again, kind of getting them involved in that whole, I keep calling it an ecosystem, but that whole kind of way of solving an issue tends to be really exciting for our folks.
Okay, I'm going to do one sort of boring question, but it's one that we often get asked. Data analytics, big data, innovation falls in different places in different organizations. Can you give a little bit where you fall in the organization, who owns data or innovation for your company? Is that a CTO, R&D, CIO kind of operation, marketing? Where does it fall? Then we'll go out to the audience for questions if you have any. Brandon? Now you remember the question.
It changes from week to week. We're currently doing a restructure of certain areas of the company. Once all is said and done, there will be a new digital arm of Syngenta that will focus on all of our data aspects, everything from gathering new data to finding out what new data is available, but then also people to run the data analytics and artificial intelligence on that.
We actually have two groups in our IT department. One's run excellence and the other one's transformational excellence. And data is really in the transformational side, and we're really talking strongly about how can we switch that to the run side. It needs to be more of a day-to-day operation as opposed to something we're doing that's like, oh, wow. But one of the topics I did want to mention real briefly when it comes to industry challenges in big data is the concept of trust. And that's something that we have a big challenge with, and that's why it's still transformational. It's really hard when we talk about. I always joke. There's a lot of people within Ameren who would tell me that they do predictive analytics, and when I ask them what that looks like, they say, "Well, I print out a report from Oracle Business Intelligence. I look at it and predict what's going to happen," and that's not predictive analytics. So, if you put that on the computer and you say, okay, make a decision for me, somebody along the lines has to trust that decision that came out of that analytic of some sort. And so that's where I'd say is our biggest challenge right now, is trusting that. And that falls all the way down to our interns are doing incredible things, but how can you sell what the interns are doing and make the executives trust that? And so over time, we've been really building that concept. So I'd say that's a long way to answer Laura's question, but really we're trying to figure out how can we build that trust so we can switch analytics into a run-based program.
Thanks for reminding me the machine is predicting, right?
So our operation reports into our Chief Information Officer. Again, Dan Sherman that was here earlier. He has a data discovery team down in St. Louis. He also reports into our CIO. Which I think it makes sense. Our challenge, or maybe my challenge from the Innovation Lab perspective, is how do you bring other, business partners, business areas into our lab in meaningful ways? So how do we engage with them in solving some of the problems, operational or part of the supply chain, other areas? How do we bridge those different business areas? So. That's a challenge for us. That's something that I personally am focused on. How do we make those connections and bridge those areas from the innovation lab here in Champaign out into the company in various ways?
So my group reports up through information analytics. So I report to our chief analytics officer in Caterpillar. And that she is in our digital enabled solutions group. So a lot of the digital solutions on our machines or services are also in that group as well. In terms of where innovation sits in Caterpillar, it's highly distributed. It's a very distributed company. So it sits in lots of different functions as well as in lots of different verticals throughout Caterpillar. I think the thing that I feel really strongly that we are doing and that we need to continue to do is really around the theme of changing people's attitudes about data, and that data has a place in our businesses. It has a place in construction. It has a place in mining. And it's not necessarily just in semi-autonomous vehicles, but it's also in job site solutions and decision making. And it's not simply the data that that can be created by a computer module on a machine, but it's other data sources, perhaps external things. And Todd talked a little bit about that, and I'm sure that Syngenta uses, Brandon uses external data sources like weather and soil and some of those kinds of things. But additionally, it's also the data sources that we can create. There's a human in our machines, and he or she is one of the most ignored sources of information, in my opinion. So changing the way Caterpillar thinks about the kinds and varieties of data sources that are available to us, and how we approach those things culturally as a company, and then how we present those externally to our customers.
Great. Questions from the audience? Laura, if you have a microphone, perhaps. I see one in the back, straight back by the... Oh, Roger's got a microphone.
I am curious to know if you have any best practice suggestions for hiring and interacting with interns. You know, we are a startup company with the research park or the EnterpriseWorks, and we do hire interns. You know, the interns that we get are the ones who could not get into your companies. But I just want to know, how you interact. Do you get 3 or 4 students together, give them a project, assign a project lead, or you just have them come and work on your existing workflow and have them learn that way? And what are the best practice that you have learned over the course of years that you can give it to startup companies like ours?
So first off, I'll say that getting the leftovers at an R1 research institution is a pretty good crop of leftovers. We're in a pretty amazing place. I typically put our teams together, our student teams together. I like to mix them all up. So grads and undergrads and cross-discipline. So we had one of our first teams was a stats person, an aerospace engineer, an economics, and a bioengineer that worked on a neural network project. So we've had some very interesting groups. I focus much more on putting the diverse groups together and then helping put some structure around them in terms of project management so that they can focus on what the tasks need to be, in what order, get comfortable with the research and the path forward, and then we sort of provide those bowling alley bumpers along the way for them so that they can be free of the administration side of it to focus on the creative part of it, which is figuring out how to solve the problem and what tools are necessary in the work and all of those things. So the more that you can remove those sort of organizational type things that need to happen so that you can free up their thinking and the very limited amount of their time that you have, right? Because typically we only have them 10 to 20 hours a week each. So one whole team is less than an FTE. The more you can free up their time from those things to do the things that they can do best, which is why you hired them, the better off you're going to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, I might just dovetail what Beth said. So I think, at least for us, some of it depends on whether it's part of the academic semester, so fall and spring, or part of the summer. I think during the summer, when you typically have a full-time internship, team, we have a similar methodology. It's very cross-disciplinary. We actually assign roles, all the way from communications lead to design lead, on down the line. During the academic semesters, it's more challenging to bring a team of folks together, throughout the week, and of course the hours are lessened pretty significantly. And so for us, that tends to be a little more heads down. Not totally singular, but probably a little more than during the summer. internship.
One thing I'd like to add to that is absolutely yes to everything Beth said, absolutely yes to everything Todd said. But another simple thing that I always think about is once you've hired the good student, it doesn't necessarily matter what task you assign them to, because you mentioned that you were kind of curious, do you make new projects or do you give them something that you're working on? Passion is infectious. And if you're excited about what you're doing and you're excited about the project you're working on and you're talking about it and you're sharing that excitement with the student, you're going to get high productivity out of them because they're going to get excited about it. So that's just a little piece of advice that I found has worked really well for us. And you know, they may not have articulated it, but I've seen the way Beth and Todd work, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, ours is similar. I first sell the culture, and that starts with every place that we're at. Our career fair booth is different than everyone else's. Just little things like that to get their attention, because like I said, nobody knows who Syngenta is here unless you go to the School of Aces. The next thing is any time I talk to a student, whether it's at a career fair or when I bring them in for an interview, the first question is always, what would be your most exciting internship? Like, what is the most exciting thing you could do in an internship? If the kid says, I want to be a dolphin trainer, I can't give them that, but they typically will have something around the lines of, hey, I like making websites, or I want to do full stack development, I want to do other things. And then I say, okay, what are some other things you want to learn? And then the next thing I do is step into some of the projects we're working on in the lab to explain to them how they would fit into those and some of the ones that we may have in the pipeline that they could fit into, and then explain our mentoring program where if they come in as a full stack developer but they want to get some access to data science, then I say, hey, we'll come in, we'll get you 60% full stack so that you can improve your skills there, and then we'll let you 40% of the time work on some data science portion of our experiments to gain other skills.
So many of you have talked about cross-disciplinary teams amongst interns. Some of our students study several different things, so bring together cross-cutting expertise. We know that as a university, many of our famous university innovations have come from such cross-cutting, like computers and music. So I invite you to indulge in a bit of sort of the equivalent of fantasy sports league. So this is fantasy hiring of interns. If you could take on right now a student who's a mixture of X and Y, two different disciplines, preferably as weird a combination as possible, solve for X and Y.
Professor Twidell, you always come up with the most interesting questions. Project management would be my first one, but you already knew that as soon as I started to speak. And I think the second part would be data analysis. I think there are a lot of skills there that are necessary. We want to skip past those and all the industry things that we do and talk about. We want to skip past data analysis because it's not very sexy, and we've even given it some very unsexy terms like munging, which it sounds like a disease or something you should be inoculated against. But ultimately, having really strong analysis skills, being able to look at data and know what you need to ask, what you need to find out before you can perform any statistical function on it, before you can feed it into another system. And then having some sense of what it takes in terms of people and time and resources to get it there, so you're realistic about what's going to happen next.
So I'll take a slightly different tack on the question, maybe a slightly more vanilla answer. I hope that's okay. So in a former life, I worked for a large Midwestern insurance company who may or may not have a presence here in Research Park. And so we, at the time, we had a strong relationship with TNM, HEFT TNM, which is a program here at the university that sort of is an intersection between the engineering school and the business school. Most of you, or at least some of you, know that. And there may or may not even be an intern, a former intern in the audience who now is doing quite well, who was part of the TNM program. And I always felt that that intersection. And of course, some were accounting, some were finance from the B side, and then of course from the engineering side, it could be, cover the gamut. But they just had a knack of sort of viewing problems multidimensionally. And we talk about cross-disciplinary teams. Many times it's the business, it's the engineering, it's kind of bringing them together. But that particular skill set, and again, this is not a knock on anybody else who's not part of that HEFT program, but I think that they had just kind of perfected that that equation, and so I've got a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, and I would say that we're always looking for the perfect mix of technical skills and creative skills. So just to take that up to a high level, you're looking for students who have excellent critical thinking, but also excellent creative thinking, and sometimes that's a unicorn, sometimes it's not. But that's where the multidisciplinary teams come in, and then you can have them different, not only different skill sets, but different personality types and different backgrounds, different ages. Those are the things that make teams and make the results of those teams extremely multidimensional and rich.
English and economics.
Why is that your unicorn?
Because they most likely will have technical skills and be able to do data manipulation, but then will understand the outcome of the data, and then if they have the English creative writing side, that they can tell the story.
Yeah, that wasn't snarky. That was serious. He was just singing the praises of the economics student.
World's greatest English and economics skills.
That's all I can remember in my head, yes.
Need any more questions? Any final thoughts?
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead to a break. Thank you all very much for lending your expertise. I appreciate your perspectives.